Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this latest teaching session in the course on technology and the future of medicine. Today, Dr. Heather Graves is going to take us through whales, robots, and you, how technology may change what you think of as a person. Take it away, Heather.
Okay, thank you, Kim. Thank you for coming. I don't usually lecture. I'm a writing teacher. Usually I talk for a couple of minutes, then I have people write. So I'll do my best to talk for a while, but you're still going to write. Hopefully you enjoy it. Today I'm talking about whales, robots, and you, and technology. So these are my learning objectives for this lecture. Hopefully at the end of me talking for a while here, you should be able to explain what makes writing or the use of language a technology. Hopefully you'll be able to identify some examples of how language shapes, especially writing, shapes reality. I'm hoping you can define what personhood involves. You should be able to apply definitions of personhood to specific cases to assess whether they fit or not, whether that group should have rights or not. And you should be able to articulate, I hope, the link between writing and the proposed expansion of Western concepts of personhood. So I'm mostly talking about Western concepts of personhood and Western ideas of history of language and technology. And the theorists or researchers I'm citing are from that tradition. So the way I'm going to do this is by trying to provide answers to these four questions. So in what way is writing a technology? How does technology, especially writing, shape ideology and culture? So what are some of the implications of smart technology such as artificial intelligence for human culture? And what are the implications of our smart technology for the relationships that humans have with animals? So we'll start with what is technology anyway. So I looked it up in the dictionary, and apparently it's the branch of knowledge that deals with the creation and use of technical means and their interrelationship with life and society. The definition goes on, but mostly I'm talking about the interrelationship of technical knowledge that we use with our lives and with our society. So the question that arises for me really is, so what is the point of the technology that we're busy developing? And it seems to me that most of it's really geared towards trying to improve humanity's quality of life, to advance human civilization, and I'm thinking largely of Western contemporary society. I think that we're directed towards that. I think we're also trying to develop technology to help us learn more and to increase our knowledge of biological and natural systems. So all of our efforts, not all of them, but a lot of our efforts are geared in that direction. Technology is, I think it's generally intended for good, but there's also elements of technology that have less positive effects. These are just some pictures of the kinds of things I was thinking of: war technology, the technology we use to exploit the resources from the earth, the technology we use to kill each other, that kind of thing. So, I have four questions here. How is writing a tool or technology? What do you use writing to accomplish? In what ways can writing be hazardous to your health? And what is the relationship between writing and reality? So I want you to take out a piece of paper or open a word processing screen and write for a minute or two, proposing an answer to one of those questions, the one that is most interesting to you.
Could I start passing the microphone?
Sure. Okay. Would somebody please share your answers with us?
So I did prompt number 4, what is the relationship between writing and reality? I just wrote about, do you want me to literally read what I wrote, or?
You can summarize it or read it, whatever you want to do.
Okay, well I saw it being modifying reality in two ways. First off, when you write out your ideas, sometimes it's like having a discussion with someone. Oftentimes when you have that discussion, your ideas can change. You might be more convinced by some and see something in writing and think that that's not a very smart idea, so delete that idea. So it can modify your own reality and how you think about an issue. It can also, the second method I thought it could modify reality is by people then reading what you've written. So they'll read your book of writing and then may alter their pathway based on the ideas they find particularly convincing.
Good. Good job.
I chose prompt number 3, which is how writing can be hazardous to your health. And what I wrote pretty much is the argument that yes, writing can be good as a form of communication, conveying ideas, but it can also be unhealthy to us because writing can be used in the hands of wicked people, and they could write wicked things which stimulate intolerance and dogma in the population. And writing also can simulate feelings, and sometimes those feelings that are simulated may cause you to be jealous, they may cause you to do many horrible things, and I guess while there's this means of communications, there's also this avenue of abuse that's possible.
Yeah, good. Good points.
I chose number 3. No, I didn't. I chose number 2. What do you use writing to accomplish? What I said was I use my writing to enhance my personal feelings, because I felt that sometimes me personally, when I say something to someone, it just doesn't carry the same weight as if I physically go and give them a handwritten letter which carries all my emotions and with it, without me having to stumble with my words and be awkward during the conversation.
Yeah. Good.
I likewise wrote about number 3, and what I thought more so was in terms of health and safety. So I thought it could be hazardous to use writing if you're living in a utilitarian sort of country in which you're writing against what either the societal norms are or what the government is imposing upon. And sometimes, like, let's say if you're in a communist country and saying, no, the ideals should be more liberal in terms of economics, should be more towards the buyer-seller sort of ideal, rather than everyone being equilateral, that could actually have huge detrimental effects on that person, in which they might be jailed depending on what they're writing about and how it affects the society as a whole.
Good. Yeah, those are really good points. Yeah, there's a number of journalists who have been murdered because of things they've written or stuff they've reported on. So, too. Anyone else?
I wrote about number 2. I think writing's used to accomplish a variety of things. I mean, it's used to record our feelings, our imagination, but I think it helps us accomplish, I don't know, like explore our imagination, if
Yeah,
that
that's
makes
true.
sense.
Yeah.
For me, I put writing helps me to remember, which I thought was a kind of an interesting thing because on my personal life and in my academic life, I always am taking notes of what I need to do later or what I need to remember for a test. So that's one of the things I added on top of what other people have said.
That's good.
I also wrote about what I use writing for, and I said I use it to accomplish the communication of thoughts and ideas, and I kind of expanded more to say that writing is used for really simple ideas or really complex ideas, and then speaking or communicating your ideas verbally is kind of what falls in the middle, and I also said that I use it to accomplish a sense of formality.
Good.
Like Ian, I looked at question number 4, so what the relationship between writing and reality is. I found myself going off in the direction of saying that writing really is a way to get transported into the world of another person's mind. So you can talk about science fiction, you get to dream up new things, you get to talk about ethics, how we build our society. It really is just a way of making people think. It's the way we communicate. So.
Good. That's true. We also talk about using writing to learn, which is what I just did, was giving you a chance to write out your thoughts about some new ideas and come to understand what the topics in ways you might not have. So it's a really useful technique, a useful strategy too for figuring out what you think about something. So I was going to talk for a couple of minutes now about in what makes writing a technology? How is it a technology? Because a lot of people think of writing as just being more a medium that you transfer your thoughts onto paper. So it's really a transparent medium that just records what goes on in your head, your thoughts. And the way we use language to talk about it kind of reflects this attitude as well, because scientists talk about they write up the results of their experiments at the end as if it's something that once the whole job is done, then you just kind of dash off the end product of it. Doctors also talk about writing up patients' medical charts, so that's making notes kinds of things. But the question I always ask is writing really, is it just an adjunct or just a follow-up to real work? Because I don't think so. I'm going back in history here to talk about the origins of written language. And this argument is taken from Walter Ong's book called Orality and Literacy. So he was trying to get at how did written language change humanity and allow for the evolution of civilization in ways that hadn't been possible previously. So, and he's looking at the cradle of civilization being the Greece and Rome 2,500 years ago or so. I think if you take different perspectives on this from some other cultures, that you might have a different explanation, but this is kind of a general explanation for pre-alphabetic syllabic writing systems. So cuneiform writing, which is a picture of that's the writing on the left-hand side in the image there. It's a pre-alphabetic, and what it does is represent the physically heard syllables of the language, so tries to replicate what people were saying. These types of systems tend to be somewhat ambiguous, so people would use them for specific types of chores. For example, the clerks would keep track of the inventory of harvests and things like that using these types of languages, especially the cuneiform one. But what they don't enable is people to develop complex abstract thought. And so they were limited in that way. And the other drawback to this type of language was that in that period, only specialists could read them. So people weren't widely literate in these types of written languages. So it did limit the ideas and the knowledge that could be codified and handed on from generation to generation. It was mostly, if you know Homer or the Odyssey or the Iliad, those are all oral poems. And if you've studied them, you'll notice that there's phrases that keep turning up throughout, and those phrases are repeated, and they're kind of poetic, but one of their functions was to serve the memory of the person telling the story so that they could remember what the plot of the story was. So those were used as ways to hand on stories and legends from generation to generation orally. Now, a critique of this explanation, of course, is that currently there's a number of languages that exist that don't use an alphabetic syllabic language, and people who speak them are capable of complex thought. So there are criticisms of this position, but this is interesting in the way that they're trying to account for why did Greek and Roman society, the cradle of European civilization, why did that really only started to evolve and develop technology and become a strong civilization after the development of alphabetic types of languages that could be written down. And this next slide is taken from Jim Kalmbach's book called The Computer and the Page. And what he argues is that the Greek the Greeks originated the alphabetic language. And what they did was come up with written symbols that represented abstract units rather than spoken units in language. So they came up with a phonological structure, which was the phoneme, which is, it starts with a consonant, so B, P, D, T. They exist on the page, but in order to speak them, you have to add a vowel to them, and then that turns them from the letter into the phoneme, which is a meaningful unit of speech. And so this writing system is useful because it represents an abstract phonological structure rather than the real speech itself. And what it does is it enables literacy. It enables people to record ideas and read other people's original texts. So the argument goes that this writing structure enabled people to come up with and record more complex thoughts that didn't rely on repeated phrases handed down from generation to generation. The original author could produce the text, and then people 80 years from now could read what that author wrote and his or her exact ideas without having it mediated between the memory of the people who were repeating it orally. So this enabled the rise of all different kinds of human knowledge that was preserved and passed along. Now, the example I'm using is medical knowledge, because this is technology and the future of medicine, so that seemed appropriate to me. But there were many cultures that preserved their medical knowledge in texts to preserve it and to pass it along to later cultures. Interestingly, I guess in the medieval European education, medicine was one of the 4 major topics that were studied once you graduated from elementary type of education, which was made up of learning the grammar of your language, learning the philosophy of your language, and then learning how to use it in argument, which was rhetoric. And then you graduated from that to specializing in law or medicine or some of the other 2 arts, I guess they were. But interestingly, students in Rome learned medicine from studying Greek and Islamic texts that were translated into Latin. Various sources. Medicine was also taught through lecture and disputation. Disputation is debate. Supplemented with some practice, some apprenticeship, and dissection. And all of this was guided by the text that the students were reading. What I find sort of interesting is that not all of the faculties of medicine in the medieval period actually included surgery as part of the training. The real emphasis was on textual knowledge that was transmitted. This is an example from Vesalius, 1560. His book, De Humani Corporis Fabrica. He did a bunch of anatomical drawings that were based on dissections that he had done, and he recorded his study of the human body. And interestingly enough, this is his illustration of his dissection of female reproductive anatomy. And what you see here is a picture of the arteries that go from the kidneys to the ovaries. And the artery that feeds the left ovary originates in the kidney artery, and it carries unclean blood to the left ovary, while the artery that runs to the right kidney and to the right ovary, it carries clean blood. And so the prevailing notion, which originated with Aristotle, was that the left kidney and the impure blood, that always gave rise to female children, and the right ovary with the clean blood, that gave rise to male children. So that was the scientific theory of the day. So interestingly enough, even though Vesalius was dissecting women and looking at their organs, this is the illustration that he came up with rather than what he really saw, because scientific theory of the day was set in stone that this is the way that female anatomy was set up. So the tradition really demanded that Vesalius see what he should see, not necessarily see what was there, because the knowledge that had been handed down from generation to generation through Aristotle said that this is what you should see when you look at this. So that raises the question, so in this case, the technology of writing, how does it shape ideology and culture? And this is one example. What writing does is it sets ideas in stone so they can be passed along. They become knowledge rather than folklore. Writing creates permanent records of this knowledge, but that can be correct knowledge, it can be incorrect knowledge, but the writing does transmit them either way. And culture, history, and tradition, those are the things that kind of cast knowledge into stone, and so that even reality has difficulty overriding the things that we've handed down as accepted knowledge in our areas. So Aristotle's science, you could really call it this anatomy or ideology of human anatomy, it took basically 2,000 years for that to be discredited. So it was pretty firmly rooted there and infused through the culture, and it did take a while before anyone was able to overturn that and replace it with something that I guess was a different depiction of reality. This is another case. This is that I'm going to talk to you about to do with writing and medicine. And it's based on an article by Patty Kelly called A Rhetorical Analysis of Premenstrual Dysphoric Disorder in Canadian Newspapers. So what she did was look at the newspaper coverage of premenstrual dysphoric disorder in Canada from 1986 to 2007. And her thesis for this research was that the creation of new mental disorders occurs in a social and political context, and medical classification carries tremendous rhetorical force. So she looked at the way in which PMDD was proposed as a psychiatric disorder, and then how it made its way into the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. So she looks at the history of the coverage and then how that affected the way that PMS, premenstrual syndrome, was represented to the public in Canadian newspapers. So this is kind of interesting. So originally, placing the diagnosis of PMDD in the DSMV, I guess, DSM, it was very controversial when it first came out in 1987. So it was originally appeared in the appendix because it wasn't, doctors or psychiatrists hadn't decided whether it was a real thing or not. They were just proposing it from their observations of people's conditions. So there was a lot of debate about including it at all, let alone including it in the appendix. And then, almost 7 years later, the 1994 edition came out, and PMDD appeared both in the manual itself and in the appendix. And in the body of the text, it was listed under depressive disorder not otherwise specified. The key thing here is that an insurance code came along with the diagnosis, which meant that doctors were then able to diagnose it and bill it to health care providers. And so that's when the disease really kind of started to gain a foothold in in culture, because doctors could be paid for diagnosing and treating it. Interestingly, the subcommittee that was talking about PMDD as proposing whether or not it should be included, they concluded that there was very little empirical evidence that supported it being included at all, which is kind of interesting that it was then included, it had the insurance code and began to be billed for. So what Kelly's doing then is looking at the way in which the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, it's a pretty credible source for doctors, of course. It's authoritative in psychiatry. And what gets included in this book, or this manual, is really enacting what the values of biomedicine are, and facilitates the work that psychiatrists and other types of physicians want to do. So it's intended to aid, it's intended to represent the field. But what she noticed was that when this disorder became included in the manual, then it started to infuse beyond the manual. It was only intended to help that specialty of physician treat that type of patient. It wasn't really intended to affect the way the larger general public saw this disease or saw the people who had it. Nonetheless, by being included in the manual, it started to infuse into the broader culture. And what she saw from looking at the accounts in the newspaper was that eventually, instead of being confined to the disorder of PMDD, the symptoms of psychiatric disorder started to infuse in just regular symptoms of premenstrual women, so that they started to be labeled sort of as mentally disordered because of the relationship that was drawn between these two things. So Kelly concludes, the DSM standardized diagnostic criteria become persuasive not only for the professional audience for whom it was originally intended, but it also becomes persuasive for public audiences. So in this particular case, I'm arguing that, and I guess Kelly is too, that writing doesn't just record thought, it also shapes and changes reality. So what we think of as reality alters in response to the things that we set down in writing in authoritative manuals and guides and government laws and things like that. So, what are some of the implications for the power that writing has? Well, it does enable complex thought. It also enables the efficient compression of ideas. We can get our ideas down very concisely and clearly for other people to read. Writing also forms the basis for human knowledge. It enables our ability to generate it as well as preserve it and share it. And basically, the 21st century has been called the knowledge economy, and its basis really is writing. So writing will be one of the technologies that enable your success as an educated and professional person when you go from the university. Now, with increasing knowledge, that's also led to more sophisticated technology. The more we learn, the more we can put into the technology that we develop. Technology generates more knowledge and greater understanding, and it seems to me there's kind of a synergy between the knowledge and the technology. But at the same time, it raises important ethical and philosophical questions. Ultimately, I argue that it may require us to rethink our relationship between us, nature, and our technology. So, what are the implications of smart technology such as artificial intelligence for human culture? I'm going to start to answer that, and then I'm going to go on to my fourth question in order to provide a full answer. But our initial forays into artificial intelligence started off with the ELIZA program that combines databases of language with rules to inform intelligent sentences. So you can actually go online and talk to this computer, and she will respond to what you're talking about, or the conversation or topic that you raise. The Turing test, I'm sure you're probably already familiar with this. You probably know more about this than I do, so I won't dwell on it. But that was one of our first forays into human-like machines. Most recently, the Japanese have developed robots that actually perform housework and can act as companions for people who are lonely. The notion of a sentient human machine is also widespread in science fiction literature, including The Wind-Up Girl. It includes an engineered being who is conscious and sentient, but she's not considered a human in her society. So it seems to me we're making our way in that direction. I don't think we're there quite yet, though. So I want you to take another couple of minutes and think about and write about one of these questions. So what is our current relationship to technology? When our technology is smarter than we are, how does that change our relationship to it? Should machines have rights similar to human rights? And what circumstances can you think of that might lead to machines having rights? So just pick one that you think is interesting and formulate a few sentences in response to the question.
I really like the wording of the second question. So right now our technology is our servants, right? And when it's smarter, the relationship will change, and that means something of a give and take. So for me, what jumps to mind is it'll be like a parent-child relationship. You'll have to control yourself a bit more. I, for one, wouldn't want to give my computer headaches by asking it to do as much as I do right now. So we might be a little bit more careful with what we do with it, I think.
That's a good point, yeah. Good.
I did the first question, so I just said that our current relationship with technology can be generally summarized by just saying dependence, and that pretty much every aspect of our lives is either influenced or directly involves technology in some way.
Okay, good.
I talked a little bit about, I wrote, about if machines have rights similar to human rights, and I kind of thought about it in the same way that they kind of already do in a sense. Like, if we have pets, animals have rights, like you have the right not to hurt your pet, or somebody can't take your pet, and similar to my laptop, it experienced the same thing. And I think currently we're almost working on a right of free speech with the internet, with net neutrality that they're currently working on. So I think there was similar comparisons. Like, I know it's not the same, it's usually rights given, for the benefit of a human, but I think we're getting there.
Yeah. Good.
I also wrote about the fifth question. Just to expand on what he said a little, I mean, pets have rights because they can feel pain, they can feel emotion, and they might love you back. Who knows, right? But I don't think machines can in the same way because they're not living. They can't express themselves. So I think the only, I don't know, there might be more circumstances, but the only circumstance I could see that may lead machines to have rights is if a human have an intimate relationship with a machine, but that'd be really one-sided. So it's kind of a little weird.
Yeah, that's a good point to raise, though, for sure.
For me, I wrote on the first question, and I was kind of saying that we're probably overly reliant on electrical technology. So like on cell phones and such, like people used to be able to recall somebody's phone number. Just if you were to ask them, hey, what's this person's number? They would just be able to tell you, whereas now we have to go on our cell phone and be like, hold up, I think I know this number. And that's the same with addresses. And even one thing like using a GPS, oftentimes people don't know how to get somewhere unless they have their GPS, instead of like trying to create that sort of mental map. And in a way, I think that's influencing our ability to call anything and might be negatively influencing our ability to be self-reliant.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. It's kind of scary, isn't it?
I answered the third question, and in this case, I'm assuming machines, when they have reached the point where they have conscious thought and intelligent thought, and not just machines as they are right now. So I do believe that they should have some rights, similar to human rights, but they should also obey the 3 laws set up by Isaac Asimov. Do you know who he is?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, the 3 laws of robotics. So.
Good. Good.
Okay, I also wrote on the first question. I mean, that seems like one of the most popular ones. So my take on this is that our relationship with technology right now, it seems to be like technology is our spouse that we take for granted. I think technology does a lot of great things. Like we totally depend on it. I mean, when's the last time you've seen someone build a car from scratch? I haven't seen it ever. And I guess I'll comment on how this current relationship might change, because right now we already don't appreciate some of the things that technology does. We're dependent on it, but we don't realize it. But in the future, as these technologies grow exponentially, perhaps beyond our understanding, right, we'll have sort of more trouble grasping what technology is to us, and perhaps technology will become an equal to us, like a brother, or even surpass us and dominate the human race. So it's really interesting, the paradigm that's present right now.
Yeah, I really like your metaphor.
Pretty much all of what I wrote about has already been said, but I just wanted to reiterate that I think, just talking about all the prompts in general now, I think if technology is smarter than we are, I think in aspects it already is, and I don't think our relationship should change. I think it will still be treated as a tool regardless of if it is smarter than us. I think the key factor is whether it's sentient, and that would bring about rights. So whether it's super complex and way more complex than a human brain, that doesn't necessarily that it should have any more rights than a pencil or, I don't know, a really complex. Yeah, like it's simply merely a tool that we can utilize at that point.
Okay, good point.
It's like with mostly everyone, I answered the first question, and I said the same thing where it's like we're really dependent on it, but at the same time, we only like it when it's fast and reliable, because like if it's not fast and reliable, we just tend to dispose it. So that's what I feel like our current relation to technology is, something disposable, because unless it's something to use to us.
Right, good point, for sure. Okay, I'm going to address the last question a little bit more here and the rest of this presentation. So what are the implications of smart technology for our relations with animals? So this always raises questions for me of what separates humans from machines and animals? Like, how do we see ourselves as being different? So philosophers have actually talked extensively about this to answer this question, and these are some of the areas that they've identified where they believe humans are different from all other animals. Number one, in language and our ability to communicate with each other, so both verbally and textually with writing. Cognition, our ability to reason and think. That's another thing that distinguishes us. Our consciousness, so the fact that we can be self-conscious and embarrassed is also, those kinds of emotions are typically human. Our ability to develop morality or live by codes of morality, and also our ability to develop and preserve tools through machines and knowledge. So those are some of the areas in which we've historically and philosophically been viewed to be different from animals. Now there's a lot of cutting-edge research going on in looking at whales, which are the cetaceans. And this research has been reported in the literature by Hal Whitehead, who's a biologist, marine biologist at Dalhousie University. And this is some of the insights that he's gleaned from, he goes out and chases whales around and studies them. And what he suggests that whales actually do have their own languages. So every clan is unique. They have different feeding patterns. Each clan migrates to different places and different routes. They look after their baby whales in particular ways, distinguished by the clan they belong to, and also how often they reproduce is also based on the tradition of the clan. Each clan speaks its own dialect, so it signifies their group identity, and they can recognize other clans, what they're saying, but also that they don't belong to they're someone else's clan. Apparently the dialects that they speak are learned, so they're not genetic, and they pass them down from generation to generation. And Whitehead claims that when humans hunt whales and they break up a pod of whales, they're really destroying an ancient and living culture. So it's not just harvesting a whale to eat, it's destroying a family or a clan group that's existed for a long time. Some neurobiological conclusions about whales' brains. Apparently whales do think, they have cognition. Their brains are really different from land mammals. I forget her first name, but Marino is the neurobiologist who's been studying whales, and she says that they're an alternative evolutionary route to complex intelligence. So she talks about humans are always looking outward to the stars in the heavens for signs of intelligent life, and they could really just look in their oceans, and they would find that whales are probably possibly even more intelligent than humans, but we haven't really thought of there being an extremely intelligent species right on our own planet, I guess. She notes that they have extremely well-developed limbic systems, and limbic systems are the systems that process emotions. So they have actually a hyper-developed one compared to humans. So their paralimbic lobe is located near the cortex. It suggests that whales combine emotional and cognitive thinking. So this would mean that they have sophisticated social communication and self-awareness, perhaps equal to or exceeding humanity's. And researchers speculate that whales may be more socially connected, communicative, and coordinated than humans are based on the development of their brain and the greater development of the limbic system. Whales are also conscious, so they use echolocation to hunt, of course, but Whitehead also proposes that echolocation may be the world's most powerful imaging device, so whales may be able to use it like ultrasound so that they see inside each other's bodies, so they can see inside each other and know when someone else is sick, know whether they've eaten or not, whether the other whale is pregnant. So there's a lot of information they could get from this system that we wouldn't really think of even being possible. He argues that whales can process this information and share it with each other. So in effect, they're seeing with each other's eyes. And he has also proposed that whales spread out across the ocean belonging to the same clan may form a single sensory loop so they can share information back and forth. So I think this is pretty interesting stuff, really. So the whole notion of personhood. Lori Marino, she's the neurobiologist. She says that humans are considered persons because they have a certain set of characteristics. So they're self-aware, they're intelligent, complex, autonomous, cultured, etc. She says that if we accept this definition, and versions of this are used around the world in constitutions and other legislation, then the latest science is telling us that cetaceans or whales are also qualify as persons. And in fact, in 2010, an academic conference was held on cetacean rights. So they met in Helsinki, Finland, and they brought together researchers from across the disciplines for an interdisciplinary discussion of whales. What do we know about whales? What's the present state of knowledge? And so their goal, the text in blue, the goal of this discussion was to build a collective case for the attribution of basic moral and legal rights to cetaceans great and small. And the outcome of this conference was the Declaration of Rights for Cetaceans. So this is a copy of the conclusions that they reached, but what they are suggesting is that cetaceans as persons have the right to life, liberty, and well-being, which I believe that's really close to our rights as Canadians. If we're Americans, we would also have the right to pursue happiness, but the whales, they get well-being like Canadians. So to me, I was really surprised when I came across all this information, because it's quite provoking or provocative, I think. Gets you really thinking. Anyways, this was agreed, and going forward, the further development of this movement is the Non-Human Rights Project, which is taking place in the US. And the point that they make is talking about rights from a legal, juridical perspective. So if you're a non-human animal, you're simply a thing. Property that's owned by a legal person. In legal terms, things, not persons, are invisible to civil judges. So they don't have, if you're just a thing, you have no legal rights. You don't have any hope of having them, and as long as you remain a thing, You could be possessed by someone else who is a person. So the Non-Human Rights Project argues that some non-human animals should have the capacity to possess common law rights. So they should be able to press suits in the law courts. And so what they're arguing for is the passage from thing to person constitutes a legal transubstantiation. So you go from being a thing to being a person, you've been brought to legal life. So the Non-Human Rights Project seeks to persuade judges that the non-human animal has the capacity to possess common law rights. Now what they're building this case on precedent. Back in the 18th century, people with dark skin were not considered to be persons. They didn't have any legal rights. They were things so that they could be owned by real persons. And it was the great case of 1772 of James Somerset versus Charles Stuart the King that helped to abolish human slavery in England, and from there sparked a legal conflagration that within decades would consume human slavery everywhere in the Western world. So it was really, when the case was argued in court and people with dark skin were declared persons, that slavery had to be abolished in Britain. So the Non-Human Rights Project is taking this as a precedent and trying to construct legal arguments for animals. So the legal working group in this project has identified 5 states in the US that may be receptive to their legal arguments. So they're writing documents to legally challenge the status of some animals as things or property. They're not arguing for all animals. They have identified elephants, the great apes, I believe, whales, gray parrots. I think there's, did I say elephants? Yeah, there's 4 or 5 species that they're arguing should have rights based on our understanding of the complex intellectual situation for these animals. So that what they're going to do is figure out which state would be most receptive to their legal arguments and then file a case there to have the situation argued. So their goal is to have these animals declared legal persons so that they have rights, including bodily integrity and bodily freedom. So you could think, well, maybe this is a fad, but in 2004, which is 10 years ago, a Time magazine observed that while animal law was once the preserve of activists, many law schools have been studying this area of law, and it's been growing. So animal law is an emerging field in law school curricula, and in fact, 5 ape species have had basic rights in New Zealand since 1999. So people in New Zealand are ahead of North America anyways in this area. So I thought these might be some interesting questions for us to talk about. So what are the implications of the Non-Human Rights Project? How might a court decision in favor of the Non-Human Rights Project change our language or alter our current reality? What implication does granting non-human rights to some animals have for human relationships with the rest of nature? And also, what implications does it have for the intelligent machines we may create in the future? So anyone want to address any of these or have any ideas?
I'm going to speak on number 2. I think if they truly did get around to passing the Non-Human Rights Project, it would change the language in the sense that you can no longer get up and say, I'm going to buy my daughter or son a puppy. I mean, granted that the dogs fall under that non-human rights species that they want to give rights to, because you wouldn't be buying them anymore if we see them as persons. You would be adopting, I guess?
Yeah, I
Which
guess
you can
so.
do already, but it's such a common phrase to go to the pet store and buy a puppy. And we
That's
would have
right.
to rethink our language in ways like that.
Good. Yeah.
I'll attempt to address the third question in terms of what implications does granting non-human rights to some animals have for human relationships to the rest of nature. And I think it could affect our relationship in two ways. One of the relationships right away is that like if we're doing it for some animals, like why aren't we doing it for all the animals? I mean, I think most animals have some mechanism of feeling pain. If we say like we're abusing this puppy or this penguin, right? Like if that can feel pain, then how about that insect, right? Or do ants have any rights?
Mm-hmm.
Are they sentient beings? Because obviously they can create such complex structures.
Right.
So that's one thing we have to consider for granting non-human rights. And I guess another implication that comes from granting these rights is it will affect our relationship with the environment for sure. Because a lot of the things that humankind has done, like we create our housing, our technology, and that creates pollution, waste. It also takes away habitat from these animals. And
Right.
are we not declaring war on these people, right? Because these animals are given this person status, and we're technically assaulting them. We're committing genocide if we're
Right.
killing them off. Like many species are going extinct right now. So I guess that's the most serious implication out of this. And if we do decide to grant human rights, perhaps it will change our actions towards the environment.
Yeah, all very good points. Yeah, it becomes quite a messy situation, doesn't it, when you follow some of the implications.
I just have a question. I have a question for you. So is it that they're wanting to grant rights equivalent to humans, or just more than they already have?
I think they're trying to get some basic rights for them. For example, stop whaling so that we're no longer able to hunt and kill whales. There's a ban on, most of countries in the world have agreed to stop whaling, but not entirely. So that's one of the things. So they have the right to not be bothered by human beings and to live out their lives in the environment in which they're comfortable. It means that it would probably mean that we couldn't keep them in zoos and marine parks, right? The whales and dolphins, and it would also mean elephants, I think, and then there would be harsher penalties for people who killed elephants, because there's a terrific problem with poachers of elephants in Africa. They're basically wiping them out, and rhinoceroses as well, I understand. So I think what they want is some rights so that there's some moral retribution against people who kill, for example, elephants, wipe out a whole herd of elephants. So I think that's what's motivating this, is to try to get people to see them not as resources for humans to harvest, but as a complex life system that is entitled to its own freedom and its own life, and not to be threatened by people. I think that's kind of what originally is motivating it, but you can see implications for extending this too.
Okay, I think mine sort of fits in with the first one, but just bringing it back to sentient machines more so. It's an interesting consideration, because when we think of the potential that certain types of animals are sentient, it's a little bit different because their experience of reality is much different than ourselves. So, I mean, when you think of a puppy like deserving the same rights as human, like our right to like that they should be able to go to university, and like all these like it's so bizarre to us to think of that. While they might be sentient, it's kind of like in their own way as an animal.
Yes.
So it's interesting, because when you think of sentience in a machine, and I'm actually going to be presenting on this on Tuesday, but when you think of that, it's in a realm that we understand. So it might be more easy for us to consider a fully sentient a machine as deserving rights equivalent to humans. But for me, like personally, when I think of rights for an animal, it's difficult for me to say that they deserve all the rights that humans do, because some just don't apply to their experience of reality.
Right. Yeah, I think those are good points. Yeah.
I actually have a question about this subject. I guess it relates to some of the problems with translating like definitions and writing into action. Like, if we do define new rights for these animals, like how can we enforce it? I mean, we also have our own interests as a species to help ourselves, help the individuals in our species. And I think a lot of animals in the world are do that. Like if you run into a tiger and it thinks you're threatening its cubs, obviously it's not going to refrain from biting your head off and
Right.
gnawing you to pieces, right? So I guess as humans, while we do consider ourselves as more sentient, how do we actually enforce it? Just these non-human rights.
Yeah, that's a good question. It raises a lot of really sticky issues about what level of rights. And yeah, the wild animals who look at us and think dinner, they're not going to refrain from killing us because we're human, right? So I think it does raise a lot of really tricky philosophical and ethical issues. And perhaps I think what's motivating is more people, the more we understand how that animals are not just here for our benefit and that they have their own abilities and qualities. I think that a lot of this is motivated out of wanting human beings to recognize that and not exploit the resources the way that we have in the past and felt that we were entitled to. So, but I don't know where it'll go. It seems to me it could go down some really ridiculous paths too, some of which that you've pointed out.
I also have another question, just for generally discussing writing as a technology. I understand you're a lecturer for writing, so I'm just curious about your opinions of how writing will change in the future. I mean, it already has changed from the past where our words are getting simpler perhaps today and our communications might be quicker, like in instant messaging. So I just want your opinion on what you think the course of change for writing is in the future.
I think a lot of people are going to become better writers. I think there are going to be better resources and more opportunities for people to write, because that seems to be at the heart of contemporary civilization, is writing and communicating with one another. So I think we're going to be able to do that more easily and more clearly. I don't know about, there's something about paper that seems to me more permanent than electronic files, right? As I think of all the computers, computers were invented in my lifetime. The first third of my life, we used typewriters with erasable bond paper for our to do assignments at school. And so when I think of all the iterations of computers I've thrown away with the files on them, I've had to reinvent the same knowledge over and over and over again, because first it was on a 5.5-inch floppy, and then it was on a 3-inch floppy, and then it was on an XP operating system, and now it's on, I think it's a Lion operating system. So in some ways, it's easier to create text and meaning and knowledge, but it's a lot harder to preserve it in electronic means. That's one of the things that I've observed. So I think if we have a massive power failure and we wipe out all our electronic records, then we're going to be back into the Middle Ages or earlier again, right? Because so much will be lost. So not that I'm a Luddite, but I can see the advantages to paper books that are at least tangible, and as long as they don't burn or get destroyed by water, you can read them even if they're 1,000 years old. I don't know if that really answers your question, but that's my thoughts. Anyone else something to offer or suggestion?
I just for the last question, I feel like if we think non-human rights project for language, right? I think we'll make technology to kind of translate our language to the animals to further understand what they're thinking about. So I think that's what might happen, or it could happen.
Yeah, that's a cool idea.
To be honest, I'm doing question number 5. But to be honest, I think the more intelligent our machines are, the dumber we become. Because, if you look at cell phones, for example, like smartphones, back in the good old days, people, when they talk or write, they write with periods, proper punctuation, grammar. And now, I don't know, through texting, you get your LOLs and hashtags and all that stuff, right? I mean, it's like cell phones is creating like a new linguistics, kind of like the texting
Dialect.
linguistics, right? So,
Yeah.
I mean,
Well, that depends on, do you feel like you have to write like that whenever you write something? No, mostly it's just in the context of a text, right? All that stuff's okay. But if you're writing an application letter that you're going to email even, you probably would make that more formal. So I see it as a case of addressing an audience according to who you're speaking to and the medium and the reason for writing. So I don't know. Yeah, there is this dialect developing that uses a lot of acronyms and emoticons and, incorrect uses of language. But if you're communicating with a friend who understands it, then you're communicating, right? Now your mom might not be able to understand that, unless she's up on the acronyms and stuff. But when you're writing to her, you wouldn't necessarily use all of the acronyms that you do. So it seems to me that you kind of shift around based on your audience and what your audience can understand. You think?
I don't know. I think it kind of translates over to like when you're writing a letter, like an email, for example, because you text so much with abbreviations, it kind of carries over, and it kind of carries over like unconsciously, right?
Okay, I see. Yeah, that would be a handicap.
A question. So let's say a language has been lost. How do you think technology is going to be able to kind of preserve that language, or us to understand a lost language? So let's say like we don't speak some kind of language anymore, but we want to see what those people wrote about or what their ideas were. How do you think we were going to able to kind of understand that?
Well, I guess humanity has preserved basically lost languages, like Anglo-Saxon. If you can access it, then you can have there's somebody who can probably figure it out. Although there's a few languages that scholars are having a lot of trouble figuring out. So it's not necessarily a given, but if you preserve it, then you never know who's going to come along that wants to devote their life to figuring that out. But the Rosetta Stone was one of the kind of lost keys to interpreting some ancient languages.
So isn't the language we have now just like 0.1% of the language we will have once we can visualize what the brain is doing? And so to a certain extent, even now, you can visualize what the brain is seeing. You may not be able to completely visualize the entire thought, but eventually we'll have this conversation going on in our heads, which in some sense will be able to visualize for other people. And then the moments we choose to speak or write something down is just a small subset of this huge, conversation going on in our heads. So what do you think about that? You must think about this from time to time.
I don't think I'd want to share a lot of what goes on in my head with other people, frankly. It's kind of messy and yeah, because part of the function of reading is that it allows you, or not reading, writing allows you to sort through the multitude of things that are going on in your head to communicate it clearly to someone else. Now, if they could somehow insert themselves in there, I still think that would be really frightening and for everyone. But I don't.
Well, it gets into a lot of other aspects of life too, like sleep. We know that sleep's beneficial, and when we sleep, we dream. Dreams seem like nonsense to us, but they must serve some purpose.
Yeah.
And so you can imagine, once we understand all that, that you would say, yeah, what's going on in your head, I don't want to know all of it. I just want to know the part that makes sense. So how can we then, look at that subset? So you don't have to speak. I can understand what you're thinking about, but I only want to understand that portion of your thinking that is in, logical sequence and so on. Probably that will also be possible. Yeah. And the stuff that's more dreamlike and chaotic, nobody's going to want to necessarily see that.
Or share, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. I suppose if you could just wall off the coherent stuff, that would be interesting. Although then what would be the reason of talking if you can just share brain
Well, I think in a really close friendship, that happens now, where you have this unspoken communication. Maybe it's through pheromones or, how your eyes look, that sort of thing. So we're already having some experiences like that, where we feel that, communication is taking place without words, with somebody that we know really well. So you can imagine that in 30 years, this lecture you've given today will be a lot more complicated than you ever imagined in 2014. Anyway, our time is up. Thank you very, very much.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.